What if I told you that everything you've been taught about your CPTSD symptoms is a lie? What if the hypervigilance that keeps you awake at night, the emotional sensitivity that makes you feel everything so deeply, the dissociation that makes you feel like you're watching your life from outside your body, what if these aren't signs that you're broken, but evidence that you're awakening to abilities that most people will never possess? I'm about to reveal something that will completely transform how you see your trauma symptoms. Something that the mental health industry doesn't want you to know because it threatens their entire business model. Your CPTSD symptoms aren't pathology, they're spiritual gifts in disguise. And the moment you understand this, everything changes. 3 years ago, I was in therapy talking about my hypervigilance, my people-pleasing, my constant anxiety. And my therapist looked at me with that concerned expression and said, "These are symptoms we need to manage." But something inside me rebelled against that word manage. I didn't want to manage my symptoms. I wanted to understand what they were trying to teach me. And what I discovered changed everything. If you've ever felt like there's something different about you, something that makes you see and feel things that others can't, if you've ever wondered why you seem to absorb other people's emotions like a sponge, if you've ever had experiences that others would call paranormal or impossible, then you need to hear this. Hit that subscribe button right now, like this video, and tell me in the comments what CPTSD symptom have you been told is a disorder that you're now starting to see as a gift. Let me start with the most controversial truth of all. Modern psychology has convinced you that your trauma symptoms are evidence of mental illness. But every single symptom they've labeled as pathological is actually a sophisticated adaptation that your nervous system developed to survive in an environment that was spiritually, emotionally, and energetically toxic. Your symptoms aren't random. They're intelligent responses to an intelligent threat. Think about it. You were a child living in a narcissistic family system where reality was constantly being distorted, where emotional violence was the norm, where you had to develop supernatural abilities just to survive. Your nervous system didn't just adapt, it evolved. It developed capabilities that most people don't have and never will have. But instead of honoring these gifts, the mental health system has pathologized them. Let's start with hypervigilance. The mental health industry tells you that hypervigilance is a disorder, a symptom of PTSD that needs to be treated. They want you to believe that your constant scanning of your environment, your ability to pick up on subtle changes in people's energy, your capacity to sense danger before it manifests, they want you to believe this is a problem. But here's what they don't tell you. What they call hypervigilance is actually what shamans and mystics throughout history have called heightened spiritual sensitivity. Your nervous system has been trained to perceive beyond the 5 senses. You're not just scanning for physical threats. You're reading energy fields, picking up on emotional frequencies, sensing the intentions behind people's words. I remember the first time I realized this. I was in a meeting at work and something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but every cell in my body was screaming danger. My rational mind told me I was being paranoid, but I listened to my body. Later that day, I found out that 2 of my colleagues had been planning to sabotage my project. My hypervigilance hadn't been paranoia, it had been psychic perception. This is what Dr. Judith Herman didn't understand when she defined hypervigilance as a symptom of PTSD. She was looking at it from a purely medical model, but she missed the spiritual dimension completely. Children who grow up in abusive environments don't just develop anxiety, they develop extrasensory perception. They become human lie detectors, energy readers, intuitive healers. The research backs this up. Studies show that people with trauma histories have heightened activity in the right hemisphere of the brain, which is associated with intuition, creativity, and spiritual perception. Their nervous systems are literally wired differently, in ways that allow them to access information that others cannot. But here's where it gets really interesting. The same neural pathways that create hypervigilance also create what researchers call affective intuition, the ability to sense emotional information without conscious reasoning, what the mental health system calls a disorder. Neuroscience is proving is actually an enhanced capacity for perception. Let's talk about emotional dysregulation, another symptom they've pathologized. You feel everything so deeply. You can't watch the news without feeling the collective pain of humanity. You walk into a room and immediately know who's angry, who's sad, who's hiding something. You have emotional reactions that seem disproportionate to the situation. The mental health system calls this emotional dysregulation and wants to medicate it away. But what they're actually describing is what mystics have always called emotional telepathy. You're not dysregulated, you're picking up on energetic information that your nervous system was trained to perceive. This is why highly sensitive people and empaths often have trauma histories. It's not that trauma created their sensitivity, it's that their sensitivity made them more susceptible to trauma. And then trauma refined their abilities to an extraordinary degree. They became emotional barometers, able to sense the energetic weather patterns of everyone around them. But here's the key that the mental health system misses. This isn't a disorder to be cured. It's a gift to be refined. The problem isn't that you feel too much, the problem is that you were never taught how to work with these abilities. You were never taught energetic boundaries, emotional shielding, or how to distinguish between your emotions and other people's emotions. Think about it. If you had been born into a shamanic culture, your sensitivity would have been recognized as a spiritual gift. You would have been trained as a healer, a medicine person, someone who could bridge the world between the seen and unseen. But instead, you were born into a culture that pathologizes spiritual gifts and medicates them into submission. Now let's talk about dissociation. This is the big one. The mental health system has convinced you that dissociation is the most serious symptom of all. When you feel like you're watching your life from outside your body, when you feel disconnected from your physical form, when you have experiences of being in two places at once, they call this pathological dissociation. But every shamanic tradition on earth recognizes this as the fundamental skill of spiritual work. What you call dissociation, shamans call spirit travel, astral projection, or journeying to non-ordinary reality. Your trauma didn't create a disorder, it activated a natural human capacity that most people have lost. When you were a child being abused, your soul literally left your body to protect you from unbearable pain. This is what shamans call soul loss. And it's not pathological, it's a survival mechanism that exists in the deepest levels of human consciousness. Your spirit knew how to travel beyond the limitations of physical reality to find safety. The problem is that in our materialist culture, we've lost the framework for understanding these experiences. So when you have the same experiences as adults, instead of recognizing them as spiritual abilities, you're diagnosed with dissociative disorders and told you need therapy to ground yourself. But what if I told you that your ability to dissociate is actually your ticket to healing? What if the same mechanism that protected you from trauma is the same mechanism that can take you beyond trauma? What if your dissociation isn't a problem to be solved, but a doorway to be explored? This is what the ancient mystery schools understood. They knew that trauma could be a spiritual initiator, that suffering could crack open the ego in ways that allowed the soul to emerge. They didn't try to eliminate dissociation, they used it as a tool for spiritual transformation. Let me tell you about the night I realized this. I was having what my therapist would call a dissociative episode. I felt like I was floating above my body, watching myself from a distance. But instead of trying to ground myself, I decided to explore the experience. I let myself float higher, and suddenly I was in a space that felt more real than physical reality. I was in communication with guides, receiving downloads of information, experiencing levels of love and compassion that I had never felt in my physical body. When I came back to my body, everything had changed. I realized that what I had been calling dissociation was actually my soul's way of showing me that I was more than my physical form. I wasn't broken, I was multidimensional. This is what trauma does to spiritually sensitive people. It doesn't just wound them, it activates dormant spiritual abilities. It forces them to develop capacities that most people never access. It initiates them into levels of consciousness that are beyond ordinary human experience. But here's what's crucial to understand. These aren't gifts that you can access through positive thinking or spiritual bypassing. These are hard-earned capacities that were forged in the fire of genuine suffering. You can't fake this level of spiritual development. You can't meditate your way to it. You can't read your way to it. You have to be broken open by life in such a profound way that your ordinary consciousness shatters and something deeper emerges. This is why so many of the greatest spiritual teachers throughout history were wounded healers. They weren't teaching from theory. They were teaching from direct experience of consciousness beyond the ego. Their trauma wasn't something they overcame. It was something they alchemized into wisdom. Buddha's awakening came after years of spiritual seeking that was triggered by his encounter with suffering. Jesus' ministry began after his experience in the wilderness, which many scholars believe was a spiritual crisis triggered by trauma. Every shamanic tradition recognizes that spiritual power often comes through what they call the shamanic crisis, a period of intense suffering that breaks down ordinary consciousness and allows spiritual gifts to emerge. But here's where most people get stuck. They think that because they've been wounded, they're automatically healed. They think that because they've suffered, they're automatically wise. But having spiritual gifts and knowing how to use them are two different things. Having psychic abilities and having the wisdom to use them responsibly are two different things. This is why so many people with CPTSD get trapped in spiritual bypassing. They discover that they have these abilities, but they don't know how to integrate them. They use their sensitivity to avoid dealing with their trauma. They use their dissociation to escape from life instead of using it to heal. They use their hypervigilance to stay in victim consciousness instead of using it to develop mastery. The key is integration. You have to learn to work with your gifts consciously. You have to develop what I call spiritual sovereignty, the ability to use your abilities in service of your highest good and the highest good of others. Let me give you a practical example. Your hypervigilance can become what I call sacred discernment. Instead of using it to stay in constant fear, you can learn to use it to make better decisions about who to trust, what situations to engage in, what energy to allow into your space. You can learn to distinguish between intuitive knowing and trauma-based fear. Your emotional sensitivity can become what I call empathic healing. Instead of being overwhelmed by other people's emotions, you can learn to sense what they're feeling without taking it on. You can learn to be a healing presence for others without sacrificing your own well-being. You can learn to transmute dense emotions into higher frequencies. Your dissociation can become what I call conscious journeying. Instead of spacing out as an escape mechanism, you can learn to travel to non-ordinary states of consciousness intentionally. You can learn to receive guidance from higher dimensions. You can learn to heal trauma at the soul level. But here's what I need you to understand. This work is not for the faint of heart. Developing spiritual gifts in the context of trauma recovery is one of the most challenging things you can do. It requires you to face your demons, to feel your pain, to integrate your shadow. It requires you to develop levels of self-awareness and self-mastery that most people never achieve. This is why I've developed what I call the alchemical trauma transformation system. It's not just about healing trauma. It's about transforming trauma into spiritual gold. It's about recognizing that your CPTSD symptoms are actually evidence of your spiritual potential and learning how to activate the potential in service of your highest evolution. The system addresses all four dimensions simultaneously: mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. Because you can't just work with the gifts without healing the wounds. You can't just develop psychic abilities without developing emotional intelligence. You can't just access higher states of consciousness without grounding that consciousness in a healthy nervous system. This is what the mental health system gets wrong. They try to eliminate the symptoms without understanding their deeper purpose. They try to normalize people instead of helping them actualize their unique gifts. They try to fix what's broken instead of recognizing what's awakening. But you're not broken. You never were broken. You were always a spiritual being having a human experience, and your trauma was part of your spiritual curriculum. It was designed to crack you open so that your light could shine through. It was designed to activate abilities that you came here to develop. It was designed to prepare you for a level of service that requires you to have walked through the fire. This is why your healing journey is so important. You're not just healing for yourself. You're healing for everyone whose lives you're going to touch. You're developing abilities that the world desperately needs. You're becoming a bridge between worlds, a translator of consciousness, a healer of collective trauma. Think about it. Who better to help someone navigate a dark night of the soul than someone who has been there? Who better to guide someone through trauma than someone who has transformed their own trauma into wisdom? Who better to help someone develop their spiritual gifts than someone who has learned to work with their gifts consciously? This is the wounded healer archetype, and it's one of the most powerful archetypes in human consciousness. It's the recognition that our greatest wounds become our greatest gifts, that our deepest pain becomes our greatest source of compassion, that our most challenging experiences become our most powerful teachings. But here's the key: you have to be willing to do the work. You have to be willing to stop seeing yourself as a victim and start seeing yourself as a spiritual warrior. You have to be willing to stop trying to fit into normal and start embracing your extraordinary nature. You have to be willing to stop hiding your gifts and start sharing them with the world. This means getting serious about your healing. It means working with practitioners who understand the spiritual dimension of trauma. It means developing practices that support your nervous system while opening your consciousness. It means learning to work with your gifts responsibly. It means recognizing that your hypervigilance is actually your inner shaman scanning for energy. It means understanding that your emotional sensitivity is actually your inner empath feeling the collective field. It means realizing that your dissociation is actually your inner mystic traveling beyond the veil. But most importantly, it means remembering that you chose this path. Before you came into this body, your soul chose to incarnate into circumstances that would activate these gifts. You chose a challenging path because you knew that the gifts you would develop would be worth the price you would pay. This doesn't mean that your trauma was your fault. It doesn't mean that you deserved what happened to you. It means that your soul is incredibly brave and that you came here to do something that required you to develop extraordinary abilities. So the question isn't whether you have these gifts. The question is what you're going to do with them. Are you going to keep seeing them as symptoms to be managed? Or are you going to start recognizing them as gifts to be developed? Are you going to keep hiding from your power? Or are you going to start claiming it? The world needs healers who understand trauma from the inside out. It needs empaths who have learned to work with their sensitivity consciously. It needs mystics who have learned to navigate non-ordinary states of consciousness. It needs wounded healers who have transformed their pain into wisdom. Your CPTSD symptoms are not your weakness, they're your initiation. They're not your pathology, they're your spiritual curriculum. They're not signs that you're broken, they're evidence that you're awakening to your true nature. In my next video, I'm going to take you even deeper into this work. I'm going to show you the specific practices that can help you transform your trauma symptoms into spiritual gifts. I'm going to teach you how to work with your abilities consciously, how to develop spiritual sovereignty, how to become the healer you were meant to be. But for now, I want you to start shifting your perception. I want you to start seeing your symptoms as messengers, not enemies. I want you to start honoring your sensitivity instead of trying to numb it. I want you to start recognizing your gifts instead of pathologizing them. You are not broken. You are not disordered. You are not damaged goods. You are a spiritual being who has been through an intense initiation, and you have emerged with abilities that most people can only dream of. Your trauma was your training. Your symptoms are your superpowers. Your wounds are your wisdom. The question is, are you ready to claim your power? Are you ready to step into your role as a wounded healer? Are you ready to transform your pain into your purpose? Because the world is waiting for you. The world needs what you have to offer. The world needs healers who understand what it means to be broken and rebuilt, who know what it means to travel to the depths of consciousness and return with gifts. Your CPTSD symptoms are not your sentence, they're your invitation. They're your invitation to step into a level of consciousness that most people will never access. They're your invitation to become the person you were meant to be. So stop apologizing for your sensitivity. Stop trying to fix your hypervigilance. Stop pathologizing your dissociation. Start recognizing these as the spiritual gifts they are. Start developing them consciously. Start using them in service of your highest good and the highest good of all. Your trauma was not the end of your story. It was the beginning of your spiritual awakening. Your symptoms are not your problem, they're your portal. Your wounds are not your weakness, they're your way to serve. The wounded healer journey is not an easy path, but it's a sacred path. It's the path of transforming poison into medicine, darkness into light, trauma into wisdom. It's the path of becoming whole, not by eliminating your brokenness, but by recognizing that your brokenness is where your light shines through. You have been initiated into the mysteries of consciousness through your trauma. You have been given gifts that come with great responsibility. You have been called to serve in ways that require you to have walked through the fire. The question is not whether you're qualified, your trauma has already qualified you. The question is whether you're willing to answer the call, whether you're willing to step into your power, whether you're willing to transform your wounds into wisdom and offer that wisdom to a world that desperately needs it. Your CPTSD symptoms are not your curse, they're your calling. They're calling you to remember who you really are. They're calling you to reclaim your power. They're calling you to step into your role as a healer, a guide, a bridge between worlds. Are you ready to answer that call? Because the world is waiting for you to remember who you really are. The world is waiting for you to stop hiding your gifts and start sharing them. The world is waiting for you to transform your trauma into your greatest strength. Your journey from wounded child to wounded healer is not just your personal healing, it's your spiritual service. It's how you take everything you've been through and transform it into a gift for humanity. It's how you turn your deepest pain into your greatest purpose. So embrace your symptoms, honor your sensitivity, recognize your gifts, and step into the powerful healer you were always meant to be. Because your trauma was not your punishment, it was your preparation. Your symptoms are not your weakness, they're your wisdom. Your wounds are not your shame, they're your strength. The wounded healer path is calling you. Are you ready to answer?